Oh boy. Okay, so I'm gonna attempt to tell my story about my past year. And the reason that I'm kind of hesitant is because it is such a massive story and it goes back to when I was a child, and all of it is connected to everything.
Hey everyone, this is Joyce, host of Overthinker, the podcast. Overthinker is a podcast for those who are deep thinkers, deep feelers, and also those who love deep conversations. In this particular episode, I'll be talking about addiction, specifically love addiction. I'll be telling a little bit of my story of the past year, of how I've been choosing to overcome it, and some of the lessons that I've learned. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy the episode. In March of 2019, I guess I kind of hit rock bottom in a sense. I was dating a lot at the time. I had dated this individual for about a month. In general, I was just feeling very numb because I had had similar experiences pretty commonly in the past year. I had 2 or 3 really bad breakups. Over the next few weeks, I met someone else. It was kind of a similar thing where I fell really hard for this individual, and over time, it slowly wore off. And this is the pattern that had followed for the past year, or you could say for most of my life. It just looked different when I was a little younger. The honeymoon stages got shorter and shorter. You know, a year before that, my honeymoon stages were lasting, 4, 5, 6 months. My longest relationship was about a year. The last person I dated lasted for 2 weeks. That was my rock bottom. I just realized there's something wrong with me. I didn't feel very stable. I was always constantly up and down because of these relationships. That was kind of the beginning of a realization. When I was sitting down and talking with a friend, she's familiar with the 12-step AA programs and just has a really great skill with helping people and showing them something that they haven't seen in themselves. And for me, she said, Joyce, it sounds like you might have some sort of codependency or something like that. I basically went back and looked up codependency and realized, holy shit, like this is me. In March, I quit dating. I deleted all the dating apps and I dedicated the next year to exploring and focusing on myself. I was going to remain abstinent, just force myself, because especially after a bad breakup, my first fix, my first go-to is to find somebody else to ease that pain. What I wanted was to meet somebody so that I could kind of forget. And it's pretty funny because about a month after I made this commitment to myself, I actually met someone that I had a lot of feelings for. And it was the same pattern where it was like the first conversation, it was like fireworks. Actually, that's not true because when I first met them, I wasn't that attracted, but probably like second or third conversation, it was still pretty early on. I started getting into my own head and creating this fantasy and this story about who this person was. And so I fell for them super hard, super fast. I was really tempted to go back on my commitment to myself. But I stumbled on this old journal entry that I had written 2 years prior. I was like, man, I use people like batteries. As soon as they're out of juice, I switch them for a new one. And I said something like, I keep falling for people that I don't even know. And it was kind of a slap in the face because I didn't remember writing about that at all. And I just had this realization that I had forgotten about it for a reason. And I looked this up later and it seems like a pretty common experience among addicts. It's a form of, I guess, a defense mechanism or a rationalization because you come to these realizations about yourself. Then like a few months later, you totally forget and you're back to the same behaviors and you forget why it was important. So for me, it was exactly that. I had already figured it out at some point that I was living an unhealthy pattern. And then I think I took a break for like a month and then met someone else. And at that point, there were like no red flags going off. I was just like, oh, well, I guess I met somebody and this person might be the one. Yeah, I never intended for my relations to be short term, but because of the intensity of the experiences, they usually did end up being short term. Yeah, that kind of woke me up. So I just sat with myself and I was saying, Joyce, I know you have feelings for this person, but this is literally the same thing you've done for the past, what is it? Like 10 years of your life since you were in middle school. The patterns are there and you may not even know what those patterns are yet. You don't know what a healthy relationship looks like yet. You don't know what it feels like to be healthy. You need to force yourself to wait. You need to force yourself to grow and to focus on yourself. The thing about addiction, I think, is that for me, I wasn't very self-aware, even though I thought I was. I thought I was all these things, but in reality, I was not. I was not very good at observing myself and my actions and my behaviors. I only had certain ideas about what I was supposed to be, and then I would feel really guilty when my tendencies and my desires didn't match up with that idea. I got really used to lying to myself. I needed to break out of this cycle where I was in denial of who I actually was, because in general, addicts, they are very fantasy prone, especially love addiction. For me, it was about being able to escape into my fantasies, because in my fantasies, I had control. But in other aspects of my life, when I was a child, in middle school, I didn't feel like I had control. I had to abide by pretty strict rules. I had to go to school, come home, study, and go straight to bed. I wasn't allowed to hang out with friends after class, not until much later when I was in later high school years. Wasn't allowed to go hang out at parties. Like, my parents had hesitations about me even going to youth group on Friday nights. So yeah, it was just a very scarce lifestyle. And I think that because of that, I learned to escape in fantasies. So when I was a child, I was reading fantasy novels. I read a bunch of Harry Potter and the Aragon series, and I played games like MapleStory and when I was in middle school. But as soon as I hit 6th grade, I believe, I started to shift in my focus a little bit. I started watching porn when I was in 6th grade. I stumbled on an old this is so funny. I stumbled on an L Word recap sort of thing, montage thing on YouTube. And I just remember thinking like, oh my God, what is this feeling inside of me? And so that was the beginning. And then eventually it just like went from that to like, hardcore stuff. And coupled with the fact that, I had a ton of guilt because I was growing up in the church and I was pretty religious and I had certain ideas about what was right and wrong. But I would say I pretty consistently watched porn and all that stuff through middle school and high school. While on the surface, I was the pastor's kid. I was a good role model, or trying to be a good role model. I was pretending to be. And that girl was very pure. She was a virgin. She had decided that she wasn't going to date until college because she wanted to dedicate herself to God. So that was who she was on the outside. And I believed that was actually who I was. I think the reason I didn't exhibit addictive love behaviors in high school and before is because I had that idea of I'm not going to date until college. So even though the same inclinations were there, the same urges, the same desires, I guess it was easier to brush past it because I was still limited within a structure that honestly did protect me, because it wasn't until later when I lost all of that structure because I had walked away from the Christian faith that I started to downwardly spiral, because I lost the structure. And so I explored all these different things. And, I always thought to myself, again, there's no consequences. But with each encounter and with each experience, now I can look back and see that I was definitely slipping. I was definitely becoming more jaded. Eventually, the cycle of constantly using people, it made me really cynical and jaded about life. because I would start looking at people and I would think to myself, man, people are so predictable. People are so boring. Like, experiences have become boring. Like, everything felt dull unless I was in a relationship experiencing that high. So it's interesting that as I treated people more like tools, I lost the enjoyment in my life because I just thought, humans are nothing special. If I can go through the same cycle with them when I'm dating, like, it always felt the same each time. Like, the people were different, but the emotions felt the same. It was like this sort of numbness and desperation and just this tiredness. I felt empty. As I kind of weaned myself off of the addictive behaviors, my feeling started to come back. Honestly, I've gotten to the point now where I can enjoy almost anything, any experience in my life. I can hang out with my friends and genuinely lose myself in conversation with them and feel really good about the encounter. And that seems like a normal life thing, right? But at the time, I was not like that. It was the high was so strong when I was with the person I was dating that every other experience felt bland in comparison. So even when I was hanging out with my friends, when I was hanging out with family, or I was at work, my mind was constantly thinking about wanting to be with that person and wanting to talk with them and the next thing we were going to do together. And I was just never very present in where I was. And that really affected my ability to even feel genuine happiness and joy. In general, I am absolutely stunned by how much has changed over this past year because I'm so much happier. I'm so much more grateful. I'm more excited about my life. I feel more fulfilled. And it's interesting because if you had looked at my actions, if you had looked at what I did in the past, on the surface, it would look like we're kind of still doing the same things, Like, I was still working out. I was still hanging out with friends a certain amount. Yeah, it all just looked the same. But now I can do the same things and feel so much happier doing it. And instead of operating out of an emptiness or a scarcity, I feel like I'm overflowing. All of these things that I'm doing are now out of overflow and not because I felt like I had to prove something. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. You just heard the first part in my love addiction series. I still have a lot of the story to share and a lot of lessons to share as well. I can imagine that people who have not experienced love addiction or symptoms of it, you might be thinking, okay, that was a great story, but what does that have to do with me? So I'm going to leave you guys with 3 questions that I think can apply to all of us. So first off, what are you committed to? There's a quote that says, what you're committed to is what you do, not what you think you do. So if you're saying that in 2020, I'm committed to going to the gym, are you actually? Have you written down a plan? Have you decided when you're going to go during your week? Are you actually going? How many times have you gone since the new year? And so if you're actually looking at the actions, are you actually committed to what you're saying that you're committed to? Secondly, are you who you say you are? And part of this is realizing that we all see ourselves probably differently than how other people see us. But sometimes we refuse to see things that we don't want to see. So for example, a biggest indication of this is when you get offended. When people call you out on something and you get offended, why is that? Are you doing it because you actually disagree with them, or is some part of your ego hurting because you don't want to be that person, but part of you knows that it's true? So that's the second one. Lastly, how are you using people? And that sounds bad, but all of us do it. That's the whole basis of society, that we have family units where we can support each other and survive. But how are you using people? List a few things that you do. And also, how are you contributing? Because for me, I realized I never really had the attitude that, oh man, I want to contribute. I always did the bare minimum. I was never the friend who organized activities for the group. I would always let somebody else organize it. Or even something as simple as leaving a review for an Amazon product or on Google Maps or something, because I used to have an apathetic mindset where, you know what, even if I have some insight, I don't have to share it. Like, I'm too lazy, or it's not really going to matter anyways. But as I've kind of grown out of that apathetic view of people, I realized there's so many ways that I can contribute. And if I'm operating out of abundance, then it makes it that much easier to share my insight and share my knowledge. So what are a few ways that you guys in the next week can contribute more to the people around you, even if you don't get anything back from it? Because when we start operating out of a place of abundance, then we just live a happier life. If you're always trying to keep scores with people, like, oh, this person owes me money and XYZ, you're always operating out of scarcity. And so you always feel like you don't have enough. And so in this next week, those are my 3 questions. What are you committed to? Who do you say that you are? And how are you using and contributing to the people around you? Again, this is Joyce, and you've just heard an episode of The Overthinker. See you guys next week.